Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-08-24. Story 1, Married Life. I stand at the checkout scanning the customer's items, slowly, one after the other after another. After a while you don't even pay attention to the things they buy. You just scan it like a robot. Look for the barcode and push it through. Down the sliding ramp where they are hurriedly trying to pack their bags as fast as you can scan. I've reached a sort of zoned out state. I swear someone could put through KY jelly, duct tape and a giant cucumber and I wouldn't even notice now. My mind's elsewhere. It's mind-numbingly boring. Nobody really bothers to talk and that suits me. I actually look at the clock and see it's 10 to 7. I'll finish in 10 minutes and I just don't want to. I'd work until midnight if I could. Anything but go home. I'm 33, with no family for hundreds of miles, no friends and just him. Him who will be waiting for me to get home and fix him a meal. By the time I get home he will be a few beers down out of an 8-pack. He works as a plasterer during the day but seems to work shorter and shorter hours and drink longer and longer each evening. It's the smell that hits me as I enter our home. The low-lying stench of beer, sweat and cigarettes. He will be slouched in his chair with his ever-growing gut and bloated face, almost like a sad reminder of the person he once was. He still has all that black hair. I have a faint memory of how we would fool around in the early days, and I tugged playfully on his hair as we rolled around making love. He was a beautiful man. Now the only hair pulling is when he grabs me by mine as he pummels me with those big, cruel fists, for the terrible insubordination of being 5 minutes late home. That was last week. He left me on the floor with a few sharp kicks to my stomach and slurred mutterings about me being a cheating lying cunt. So yeah, I open the door, it's 19.15 by my watch so I know he can't complain. I'm hit by that smell, then as I hang my coat up my eyes look shamedly at my own reflection. Whilst I've never been model, my once bright eyes and flawless skin are starting to look tired. Lines, not laughter lines, are becoming ever deeper in my forehead and around my mouth. My once fabulous natural dark hair is now looking limp and flat with plenty of grey running through it. I know he's killing me. I know he probably will kill me. But what really are my options? To flee across the country to listen to my mom's I told you so's, a refuge? Or to just run away and live in poverty on my own? There was a time I had considered all of these options and I guess I'm just a coward. 'Cause I just stayed. I took the weekly beatings where he's always careful not to mark my face. I take the insults and put-downs that chip away at my very core. I walk into the lounge and he is sat there. The ashtray I hate so much is full of butts, the empty cans around him aren't a good sign and neither is the look on his face. Sometimes he has this glazed look like he isn't all there. I try and diffuse whatever the fuck is going on in his head by saying I'll make us some dinner. And without staying for a reply I scurry off to the kitchen and get out some vegetables and mince, and begin chopping up onions to make spaghetti bolognese knowing he likes that. Hoping he likes that. As at the checkout I'm functioning in a disconnected way. Chopping whilst looking down and not really thinking. When he comes into the kitchen, he staggers slightly as he walks and he stinks. I wish he paid more attention to his personal care. There once was a time I'd devour him, he looked and smelled so good. Now nothing makes me feel sicker than the thought of his hands on me. But here he was reaching out for me. His heavy and rough hand grips me by the back of the neck. His fingers clench at me like you would pick a kitten up by the scruff. As though to show me his strength he squeezes tighter and pulls me towards him so that I'm inches away. His breath stinks as he spits in my face that he had driven past the shop and seen me flirting with a customer. I tried to plead that I was just being polite, but he doesn't listen. The adrenaline kicks in within me familiarly as his right fist smashes into my stomach, doubling me over in pain. As I begin to cry he drags me down to the ground and begins to stamp on me. He sits on me with all his weight and this time he has really lost it. His face contorted in rage as he spits out insults: slut, cunt, whore, cheating bitch, as his fists now rain down blow after blow onto my upper body. His hands move and he grabs me by the hair with both hands and begins to slam the back of my head down against the floor. This is it. This is where it ends, I think. Screwing my face up with each time my head cracks against the bare tiled floors. I cry and beg, but bang bang bang, he seems determined to smash my skull in. He hates me. He really hates me, I think. For the first time in years I begin to think. I realize I still have the knife in my hands, and without even giving it much thought I swing it up. The first swing and the tip of the knife catches him on his shoulder and scrapes down his left arm. He doesn't even notice, which for the first time ever makes me very angry. I swing again and again. Now my body is rigid and he's lost the ability to slam my head down with these. I stab repeatedly at that left side of his neck and shoulder, and blood begins to pour down that scruffy plaster-stained t-shirt that was so ill-fitting his gut hung out the bottom. Now it's almost as though someone is pouring bottles of red wine down him. He stops trying to smash my head against the floor. He lets go of my head and touches his front as though in disbelief at the blood on himself. I take this opportunity and swing the knife full force, driving it deep into his windpipe and tearing it out, leaving a jagged gash that is pumping blood out faster than he could hope to stop. He tries to cry out, but all that comes is a guttural squelching sound. He falls backwards, slipping in his own mess. Within seconds he's unconscious. A large wet patch appears on his jeans as his bladder loses control. I know he's dead. I squirm my way from underneath his bloated, lifeless body, pulling myself up using the kitchen worktop. I realize how badly I just all over. I look at the mess surrounding me. The kitchen floor is simply a pool of blood. Glasses and plates and smashed, and oh my god, my head. I cannot even move it without agonizing jolts of pain searing through my skull. He really did a number on me this time. I take hold of his stupidly short legs and pull him slowly towards the bathroom. He leaves a smear of blood behind him like some menstruating slug. But now the fire of rebellion has been lit inside me. I can't stop. It took all my strength to get him into the bath. Like some ridiculous rag doll, I had to yank him by the arms and drag him in. Not just a fat useless lump, but a dead weight too. My energy was gone as he flopped down against the white tub. I sat on the edge of the bath and cried. I cried for all the wasted years. Every beating. Every nasty word. I cried because I missed the man he had been. But mostly I cried in anger. He would not steal another day from me. I go to the kitchen and get the set of knives I cherished, my pride and joy. I had always loved chopping up vegetables with. That I had almost fatefully kept razor sharp. The scissors I used to cut away his clothes. Those rags go straight into a large refuse sack. And then I set to work. Like the pig that he was, I began butchering him. With the sharp carving knife I cut in at the joints, sawing through sinew, ligaments and connective tissues. I had to force the blade through with both hands and all my weight at the larger joints. The cracking and scraping against bone made me nauseous. With his arms and legs off, there were 12 pieces of him in a big black sack. I took hold of his prick and balls, and pulling them firmly, with one fast swing of the knife they were off. I throw them into the bag too. The hardest part was the head. But I'd read articles about how ISIS decapitated people with knives, so I knew it was possible. Cutting through the spine was horrendous. I snapped to as though waking up in a bad dream. My arms were pureed up to the elbows. I ran and threw up in the toilet. What had I become? What had he made me do? Who was the monster now? I go and make a coffee. My mind flicks back over all the times I'd goad him into hitting me. How I played the oh-so-timid housewife victim, because I wanted him to push me into this. There is nothing more arousing to me than seeing the look on a man's face as he realizes I have the better of him and it's too late. Of course the police will come eventually. But by then I'll have long since stripped his bones of any flesh, liquidated it in my blender and poured him down the toilet where the other shit goes. His bones I'll smash on a tarpaulin outside, then casually toss in some nearby lake. And this place? I'll bleach every single inch repeatedly, so when the police come a-knocking there's nothing to see. No officer, I've not seen him in weeks. The last time was when he told me he had another woman and left. How many times has it been? 4. They are like predators, these men. Like hounds. They can smell vulnerability and a victim a mile off. Before long another will come sniffing. I work through the night and still go to work the next day. I work the checkout. I could have served you. The quiet mousy housewife that wouldn't say boo to a goose. Story 2, 20 years ago I took these drugs and instead of getting high I laid an egg. This happened when I was 25 years old and I had recently moved into my first apartment with my childhood friend James. We were party animals and spent much of our free time getting high on psychedelic drugs, so when James bursts in one Friday and tells me that Win is selling us this awesome new drug, I was really excited. Win owned a small record store in town, except it didn't sell records. To get what you needed you would pick up a casing for a record or CD and take it up to the cash register where Win was standing. Next you would say the code word for whatever hit you needed and Win would take the casing into the back of the store to supposedly place the disc inside, but when you opened it at home your drugs would be in there waiting for you. This is how we got our drugs, weird I know. James knew Win so everything was discussed beforehand. Apparently the high would involve euphoria and strong hallucinations and would kick in within seconds and last for 48 hours. The drug had no name. That Friday night we opened the CD casing to find 2 plain white pills inside. We took them without second thoughts and waited for the high. A few seconds went by and nothing. All night we waited for the high to kick and fuck all happened. We were pissed, so James and I decided to pay Win a visit the next morning. That morning we walked round to Win's record store, annoyed that we'd spent all that money for nothing. When we arrived we were confused, the store was completely empty. I asked around about the store and no one knew anything. James went round to Win's apartment and apparently no one had lived in there for years. Win had vanished from the face of the earth. It all seemed very shady. Why would he just disappear after selling us this new drug the day before? I suggested we should go to the hospital, but James said that if anything bad was going to happen to us it would have happened by now. I foolishly believed him. For both Saturday and Sunday absolutely nothing happened and we just brushed everything off. It wasn't until almost 48 hours after we took the pills that strange things began occurring on Sunday night. Both James and I went to bed early due to work the next day. I didn't hear from James for the rest of the night. At about 9:30 p.m. I began to feel very ill. I developed a headache and stomachache followed by a desperate need to shit. I couldn't take it any longer and rushed to the toilet. I sat down and tried to shit but I couldn't. By then the stomach pains were unbearable. Then I suddenly felt it coming, and after several minuets of agony, I finally relieved myself of a massive shit. I could barely stand up afterwards, but when I did I saw it. In the toilet bowl was an egg, slightly smaller than that of an ostrich. I passed out at the sight of it. When I awoke the next morning on the bathroom floor I quickly peered in the toilet bowl to confirm if all that actually happened the night before, and to my horror the egg was not only real, but it had hatched as well. I staggered from the bathroom into my room and when I opened the door there was someone in my room, standing there naked and pale facing away from me. It slowly turned around and to my dismay, it looked identical to me. It was fully grown with the exact same features. It was me. After seconds of it just staring at me with a wide grin, it lunged at me and threw me to the ground. It proceeded to bite into my neck until I came to my senses, grabbed it and managed to push it of me. I then strangled it. I know it was trying to kill and it had to be done, but looking down at my own face as I killed that thing, virtually watching myself die made me sick to the stomach. It still does now. After I had killed it, I remembered James and ran into his room, and what I saw there was the worst part of it. James also had a clone, but I was too late. I opened the door and there was James getting eaten by, well, James. It had consumed his left arm, shoulder and his neck. There was blood everywhere. The thing didn't even acknowledge me, it only wanted James. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. When I went back into my room, the corpse was gone and the window was left wide open. I think someone broke in and disposed of the body. If it was still alive it would have tried to kill me again. I didn't call the police, I didn't tell anyone, I just left the apartment and kept it to myself. This was 20 years ago now and I still live in the same area, so does James's clone. He has a good job and a family now. We stand on opposite platforms at the train station when we go to work and he still waves at me, every single day. Story 3, just found out I love chopping wood. Why didn't anyone tell me that chopping wood was this fun and cathartic? I've been a city boy my whole life, always living in urban and sometimes suburban environments. I never lived on a big patch of land and therefore didn't get to try out any traditionally rural activities like chopping wood. Thankfully a few days ago my girlfriend invited me out to her family's secluded cottage for her cousin's birthday party. A couple of hours into the party, my girlfriend's uncle mentioned needing more wood to throw in the fire and wanted a volunteer to head out back and chop some. I jumped at the opportunity since I had never done it before. It was a big party, with all her extended family there, and I wanted to prove that I could excel at such a traditionally masculine activity. We went outside and after a brief tutorial Uncle Dave handed me the old, weathered axe and I got to the work of chopping big blocks of wood into smaller pieces. It was amazing. I had always stupidly assumed that you needed a lot of brute strength and a sharp axe to chop wood. What I came to realize, however, is that it all comes down to simple physics. You lift the axe over your head, bring it down, and then gravity does its thing. It's such a fun, delicate dance between humanity and mathematics. You turn your body into a little machine for an unseen equation of the universe. Lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop. And the sound. The sound is so satisfying. It's like the wood is accepting the axe into itself and offering its approval for a natural event with an appreciative thunk. The axe belongs there. I do have one question, though. Perhaps this would be better suited to r/woodcutters, but I like this community and I think you guys can help me. What do you do about the screaming? I suppose the wood screaming after being struck is natural, and it didn't really bother me. The screams did break my concentration a few times though, and I'd rather they didn't. How do you get in a place mentally where the blood-curdling screams don't interfere with your chopping? You know what I mean. The wood screams bloody murder and even sometimes gets out a few sentences like "Oh my God, what are you doing?" and "He's crazy." He's crazy. In this instance one block even knew my girlfriend's name as was like Becca, "He's killing us. Help." The mess also proved to be a bit of a problem. I got crimson sap all over my clothes. Is there a specific kind of detergent to get that out? The wood of course began to barricade itself inside some rooms in the cottage, but that wasn't really an issue. I assume that's what the axe is for. Really it's just the screams I could do without. Any thoughts? I don't want to stop chopping wood now that I know how fun it is, but I would like to avoid the screaming. Story 4, Noah in the well. When I told Mama I thought her new fiancé was getting a little too touchy-feely with my twin brother, Reuben, she just smiled softly and shook her head. No, honey, that's normal. Joel is a father figure to Reuben, after all. I don't think it's right for a father to kiss his son on the lips. Now you're just being silly, Martha. Mama smoothed my long red hair, which was past due for a trim. Then she handed me a basket and gestured towards the screen door. Why don't you go pick some wild blackberries? I was thinking of baking a pie for dessert tonight. I took the basket without a word and stepped out into the pulsing red sun. As I walked, tall blades of grass tickled my legs. Joel's old farmhouse sat in the middle of a sprawling field, which ended at the tree line. That was where the blackberry bushes grew, and it was also where you could find an old, long-abandoned well. Mama and Joel were always warning Reuben and I to be careful around it, lest we fall in and drown. It was an exceptionally hot day, the air sucked dry of any moisture, the grass yellow and sick-looking. There hadn't been any rain in days. My long hair felt like a heavy cape around my shoulders, and my skinny arms and legs itched with mosquito bites. Halfway across the field, and I was already sweating. At least the trees would provide some shade. The blackberries were plump and shiny, and painted my mouth and fingertips deep purple. They tasted wonderful too, the perfect balance between sweet and sour. I usually put more berries in my stomach than in the basket, but on that particular afternoon, only a few of the delicious fruits made it past my lips before my stomach clenched. My mind kept wandering back to Joel, and the way he'd been behaving around Reuben lately. He was always touching my brother. On the shoulder, arm, back, thigh. Always hugging him, and, of course, kissing him on the lips. Always staring at him with an expression that made me feel cold and slimy all over. Being only 9 years old, I couldn't have articulated why it made me so uncomfortable, especially since Reuben himself didn't seem to mind. He loved Joel. So did Mama. I used to love Joel, and even now, it would be a stretch to say that I hated him. That was the thing about Joel, he could charm anyone into loving him, whether or not they wanted to. Once the basket was overflowing with blackberries, I slumped down onto the grass, my back to the woods, and stared out at the field before me. I could clearly see the house from here, and I pictured Mama puttering around the kitchen, mixing dough for pie crust and humming some old Emmylou Harris tune. She had been so happy since meeting Joel, and even more so since we moved into his house. They were set to get married in October, and Joel would officially become stepfather to Reuben and I. He had even talked about legally adopting us, an idea that may have appealed to me once, but certainly didn't appeal to me now. Hi. Startled, I jerked my head to the right, where there was nothing except for dead grass and the old well. Built of crumbling grey river stones, it rose about 4 feet out of the ground and was closed off by wooden planks, which were rotting away. A sour, nose-wrinkling smell wafted through the holes where knots had fallen out, and through the cracks. Hi. I panicked and scrambled to the side of the well, convinced someone had fallen in. "Are you okay?" I shrieked. "I'm fine. Just lonely. It's very dark down here and cold." The voice was that of a boy, about my age. Maybe a bit younger. He sounded as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Did you fall?" I asked. "I can go get help." No. It's too dangerous out there. That's what Saul always told me." "Who's Saul?" "He takes care of me." "Well, he used to." "He's been gone for a long time." Despite the scorching heat, I felt cold. "How long have you been down there?" "A long time." "Then you shouldn't still be alive." "Mama told me that if I fell down there, I would drown." "Your mama is wrong," he said simply. "There isn't much water down here." I could hear a smile in his voice as he said, "My name's Noah." "What's yours?" "I'm Martha." "That's a very pretty name." I brought my face to the wooden planks, grimacing at the smell, and peered through one of the holes. "All I saw was darkness." "You won't be able to see me," said Noah. "I'm at the very bottom." I should have been terrified. I should have made a run for it. But it was nice to have someone to talk to. And I sensed a kindred spirit in Noah. That would later prove right, in more ways than one. "You can't tell anyone I'm down here," Noah continued. "They'll come for me." "Who?" "Them. Saul told me that if they ever found me, they would kill me." "But Martha." Mama's voice broke the bubble that had formed around me and the voice in the well. "Do you have the berries?" I stood, picking up the basket. "I have to go. Please come back." "Maybe," I said, although I knew for sure I would. When I walked back into the house, I found Joel sitting at the kitchen table, grinning at me with a toothpick clenched between his shiny white teeth. "Hello, Martha. Don't you look lovely today?" "Hi, Joel," I said timidly, handing Mama the basket. "Where's your brother?" "I don't know. I'm right here." We all turned and found Reuben standing in the kitchen doorway, in a t-shirt and shorts, his auburn hair sticking up in tufts. Joel grinned. "Come here, Reuben." Reuben came, and Joel pulled him into his lap, lips gently kneading his ear. I shuddered and turned away. "Reuben, I need some potatoes for dinner," said Mama. "Can you get some from the barrel in the cellar?" "Sure." Reuben slid off Joel's knee and disappeared down the dark stairwell. Joel himself stood and went to stand behind Mum, wrapping his wiry arms around her delicate shoulders. If she felt the bulge in Joel's pants, left over from Reuben, she didn't say a thing about it. Moving on autopilot, I began to set the table. And as the red sun slipped behind the horizon, casting the Saskatchewan countryside in blue-gray shadows, I thought about my new friend Noah, and wondered if the people after him were anything like Joel. And I feared that, one day soon, I would lose my brother. Story 5, I've missed you. So what's it like being a twin? It's probably the question I get asked the most often, and I'm never really sure how to answer it. I think people expect me to answer in one of two ways: either, I hate it. No one recognizes me as an individual, or I love it. It's like having an automatic best friend. No one has asked me that question in a while now. I squeeze the steering wheel as my heart tangles up in a jumble of emotion. Abby won't be coming home for fall break. She's at a journalism conference with her university. Thinking about it makes my heart swell up with big sister pride. Yes, I am her big sister, if only by 20 minutes, my crybaby little sister is finally growing up. Even if we are twins and like much of the same things, we have always had very different personalities. I have always been the stable, mature one, who always has her act together. Abby, on the other hand, has always been the bashful, anxious one who clings to me for support. She would cry on our first day of school and hide behind me when we made new friends. When our parents finally gave us our own rooms, she was too afraid to sleep on her own. She would often sneak into my room at night and crawl under the covers with me. Eventually though, my parents got fed up with her behavior and scolded her for it. They told her she was a big girl now and needed to learn how to sleep on our own. That night as I was laying in bed, I heard a soft knocking come from the other side of the wall. My headboard was pushed up against the wall, and Abby's was directly on the other side in her room. I smiled at what a cute scaredy cat she was being and knocked back to reassure her it was all right. This became a little ritual of ours, and we would knock on each other's walls almost every night. Even if we had fight, she would knock on my wall and I would knock back to let her know everything was all right. If it seemed like she had a hard day, I'd knock on her wall to let her know I was thinking of her, and she would knock back. I pull in my driveway, reminiscing about happy childhood memories. It's past midnight though, and I'm stiff and exhausted from a full day of driving. I come inside and hug my mom before stumbling up the stairs toward my room. I'm excited to see her, but I'm ready to pass out and we have all day tomorrow to catch up. As I'm making my way down the hall, though, I stop at Abby's room and flick on the lights. Geez, you can really tell she doesn't live here anymore. She never kept it this clean. I go in my own room and dump my bags on the floor before throwing myself on the bed. Finally. I stretch out my sore muscles and roll around in my soft, comfy bed. Abby, I'm so proud of her. I stop rolling around and flop on my back. I don't want to admit it, but it feels a little empty being back here without her. We were always together before we went to different universities. I'm not used to being away from her for so long. Shit, guess I'm the clingy twin now. I smile at myself having a rare sentimental moment. I reach back and knock lightly on the wall, before turning over on my side to sleep. Knock, knock, knock. I freeze, not quite sure I heard what I think I heard. Am I really that sleepy that I just imagined that, or did I make something fall over in the other room? After a brief moment, I hear a faint, raspy voice coming from the other side of the wall. I've missed you. Story 6, Photo Tagging, a Warning. Yesterday evening we were having cocktails at the office. The topic of conversation was baby pictures. I wanted to contribute too, so I went through my photos, but unfortunately I had no baby pictures. The oldest pictures I could find were from college. I still showed my co-workers. They commented how I used to look like a baby without facial hair. Not the first time I've heard this. My co-worker Dave said he had some hilarious baby pictures but would need some time to find them. He was scrolling furiously to get to his older photos when I suddenly remembered the search functionality of Google Photos. I told him he could just type baby into the search bar and he would get pictures that Google had determined, through image recognition, contained a baby. He typed it in and voila, we got to see pictures of Dave as a fat baby with a huge mop of hair. Then Dave got curious and said, what happens if I search for handsome? And what do you know, there were a few pictures of him dressed sharply. Everyone had a good chuckle and then got on their phones to see how Google had tagged their pictures. My creepy mind immediately went to creepy stuff, so I said, haha, what if you typed in ghost and some pictures of your empty room in your house showed up? Another round of laughter, and Dave picked up his phone and followed with, or you search for murderer and then you see pictures of. He suddenly paused and his brow furrowed. We pressed him about what he found and he said, oh hey? Nothing. Pictures of my dog showed up when I searched murderer, but he is a sweetheart, so I don't know what that's about. I had met his pup before, so I was also puzzled, so I asked him to let me see. Dave stood up abruptly and said he had to make a call and he would show me after he came back. After he returned, he seemed distant for the rest of the evening and left not long after. Later that night I could not shake the feeling that something was off, so I texted Dave and he told me what had happened. When he had searched murderer, pictures of one of our older support co-workers showed up. He wasn't sure what to do about it. I tried searching murderer as well and I got results of the same person, Peter. He had joined the company a few years back. He was good at his job and mostly kept to himself, but he never gave off a creepy/murderer vibe. Dave thought if he contacted the police and told them he suspected a co-worker of being a murderer just because of the magical and mysterious photo tagging by Google, they would not take him seriously. I suggested he could contact Google and ask them how accurate or fact-based the photo tagging is. So he did. He emailed customer support and attached some of the pictures that matched the murderer tag and asked why the photo was tagged this way. Today I was eager to ask Dave if he had gotten a reply, but he didn't come into work. He was supposed to give a presentation to an important customer, so I decided to call him, to at least send me the slide deck. I heard a vibrating noise that coincided with the ringing coming from a backpack on the desk to my right, Peter's desk. Story 7, worried about a woman I saw on the road. I'm really concerned about a woman I saw tonight and I'm here looking for advice on what to do. I'm not in my right mind, so I'm sorry if this all comes out a little confused. I went out to the pub tonight to meet up with a few friends and I guess maybe I had too much, because I'm feeling a bit tipsy. My drive home takes me through some long country roads and they're usually deserted at night, so it's not normally a problem even if I've had a few pints. Yes, I know I shouldn't drink and drive, but I'd only had a couple tonight and it's about a 20-minute drive between my village and town. Anyway, as I was driving, I came over this narrow bridge and then noticed someone walking along the side of the road. I drove up slow and realized it was a woman. She was dressed in a long white nightgown and the bottom of it was all muddied up. I thought she must be one of the local farmers' wives and perhaps they'd had a fight, but it didn't feel right to leave her out on the road. I stopped just up ahead of where she was and, when she reached the car, she got inside. As the car creaked forward, I asked her where she wanted to go. She told me I could drop her off up the road and she'd let me know when she needed to get out. Her voice seemed to crack as she spoke and I could tell she wasn't in a good way, like she'd been crying not long before I picked her up. I asked her why she was walking along such an isolated road in the dark and her only response was that she'd gotten lost. When I asked if she lived around her, she just said, not anymore. I was pretty certain at this point that she'd had a row with her fella and had stormed out the house. Her responses all seemed very dramatic and she was clearly not in the mood to have a chat. It was around about this time that I suddenly realized I hadn't even seen her face. When I'd stopped for her, she'd kind of just plopped herself down in the seat and I'd just driven forward. As I turned my head to look at her, she shouted, "Don't look at me. Please don't look at me." This obviously scared the SHT out of me, but she must have been real shook up about whatever had happened that night and I didn't want to make things worse. We drove along in silence for what felt like a century and then I noticed that her breathing was getting heavier. She was taking these deep, wheezing breaths and it was really starting to creep me out. Then I heard a few muffled sighs, and it dawned on me that she'd actually been crying for most of the journey. I felt terrible and asked her if there was anything I could do to help, like take her to the police or a hospital. "There's no hope for me now," she said. I tried to reassure her by saying that I'd take her wherever she wanted to go, but she just kept rambling about how lost she was and how there was nothing I could do. In a desperate attempt to comfort her, I slowed the car to a crawl and turned to put my hand on her shoulder. It was then that I finally caught sight of her face. She was an absolute mess, to say the least. Her eyes were both deeply rimmed with a heavy purplish black, as if she'd been punched in the face God knows how many times. Cuts on her cheeks, blood running down from her nose, it was a real nasty sight. Her hair was a tangle of mud and there was blood all down the front of her nightgown. It was clear that whoever she'd had a disagreement with had beaten her up real bad. I was in such shock that I took a sharp intake of breath and she must have heard me gasp, because she turned to me and just started screaming. It was this awful, blood-curdling, high-pitched scream, and it just went right through me. I've never heard anyone scream like that before. I was so paralyzed by fear that I didn't notice that she was scrambling for the door handle. In one swift motion, she opened the door and just sort of dropped out of the car. I screeched to a halt and got out of the car as fast as I could to make sure she hadn't been hurt. Not far off in the distance, I could see her running down the road, but this is where it starts to get weird. She was still screaming, and I could see her screaming face staring back at me. It was like her feet were facing forward, but her top half was facing backwards. Honestly, I don't know whether what I saw was real, but it terrified me. Just thinking about it now sends shivers down my spine. I know I should have gone after her, but I couldn't bring myself to follow her after what I thought I'd seen. I jumped back in my car and drove home as quickly as I could. I can't shake how guilty I feel and I have to do something to help her. Do you think I should call the police? Or should I go back there and see if I can find her? I'm sure what I saw must have just been a trick of my imagination, but I just can't get that image of her pale, screaming face out of my head. Story 8, My Beautiful Little Honey Bunny. There was always something very off about my mother-in-law. My husband, Michael, told me that if you happened to nose about in some of the drawers in his childhood home, you would be guaranteed to find at least 3 weird items. A sealed bag marked sailor's soil. A tin that rattled with the claws of ginger kittens. Jars of thick sludge, colors not from this world. Around 3 months after our beautiful honey bunny Jenny was born, Michael insisted we take her to see his mother. That she would take it personally if we kept Jenny from her. The last thing I wanted was my baby anywhere near her, but I knew Michael only said it for my sake. The old woman had some kind of grudge against me. I tried my best to be a good daughter-in-law, but nothing was ever enough. I knew she would end up showing her true colors to Michael one day anyway. I couldn't keep our baby away from his mother. He could though. I would usually stay in the kitchen whenever we visited her, leaving my husband to get on with the small talk. This time I couldn't though. Not with my baby in the house. I hung around outside the living room door instead, listening intently to any sounds Jenny made. That's when I tuned into the conversation. I would have loved for you to have a little boy instead. They have such cute little teeth. Michael stayed silent. I knew what his mother really meant was that a baby boy would have such useful little teeth for whatever it is she gets up to under the cover of dark nights. My husband had always noticed how different his mother was to all the others growing up, not that he ever chose to speak to her about it. He told me of his mother's words, words we both happened to live by. The things we know will always be more painful than the things we don't. I told him that sometimes it's best to cut certain people out of your life, whether they're your mother or not, that wife of yours. She fusses too much over the child. Sweet little honey bunny. She'll end up cursing her own daughter if she's not careful. There is no reasonable way she could know what I call my daughter. This is the first time we've met since I was 4 months pregnant. Please stop, Mum. The girl doesn't look like you at all. Her mother's eyes, her mother's hair. It won't serve her well to look like that bitch. I was ready to leave. I hoped that Michael was holding Jenny because I was ready to backhand the old hag. That's enough, Mum. Michael was already standing to leave as I burst through the living room door. I gave him a small smile. He'd never before raised his voice at his mother. I never wanted to put him in a position where he had to choose, but it was about time he started protecting his family from her. All it took was that one moment we looked at each other. We weren't looking at our baby in her arms. The old woman's fingers were in Jenny's mouth before either of us could step forward, thick orange sludge dribbling down my baby's chin. I froze. He told me so much about his childhood. Herbs hanging from the ceiling. The chanting he would sometimes hear at night. And we still decided to bring our baby to this house. To this woman. This absolute bitch of a woman who'd just put something in Jenny's mouth. I couldn't move. In that moment, I was glad for Michael's presence of mind as he snatched our baby out of his mother's arms. What did you put in her mouth? The old woman sat back and smiled. He tried to control himself, but his voice grew louder with every passing word. What did you do to her? It's honey. An old trick. Honey on the gums to be sweet like their mums. In this case, she needs the honey to be sweet like her dad. If anything happens to her, it's just honey, sweetheart. Michael stormed out of the house, pulling me along by my wrist. Come on, we're taking her to the hospital. I eventually snapped out of my shock in the car and sobbed as I kissed my baby. I tried to open Jenny's mouth and get the honey out, but I couldn't. It was almost as if her mouth had been sewn shut. As much as I tried to pull and prise her lips apart, I couldn't get any solid grip. Jenny kept quiet through all my pulling and crying, breathing silently through her nose. You can't what? Michael looked back at us as he drove faster. His eyes were red, spittle flying from his mouth as he shouted, you can't what? Her lips. I can't open them. He looked straight ahead and pushed harder on the pedal. I could see his veins pulsing through his arms as he gripped the steering wheel tight. The fact that our baby couldn't open her mouth didn't seem to shock him as much as it scared him. When I looked back down at Jenny, her cheeks seemed different. They were bulging slightly on both sides, almost as if they were swollen. Michael, her cheeks are swelling up. Swelling up? Has she gone red? Is she warm? Her cheeks are warm. She's not red. Michael, her cheeks are getting bigger. It looks like Bugs Bunny. We're here. The next few hours were a blur. The rush to find a doctor, any doctor, trying to explain why we couldn't open her mouth. Handing her over as she was wheeled into the emergency department. It was the longest wait of our lives. If anything happens to her, Michael, I'll kill that bitch myself. You shouldn't have taken her there. You knew what she was like and you still took my child there, our child. What are you saying? This is my fault. Do you think I wanted this? No, but, you still blamed me. I held my head in my hands. The lights were giving me a headache and the weight was killing me. The last thing I wanted to do was argue with my husband. But this never would have happened if he hadn't insisted on taking her. He audibly sighed as he mumbled, don't worry, I blame myself too. I left to sit by myself in the hospital's prayer room. It was empty except for a young woman with her hands side by side in front of her face, prayer beads dangling from her wrist. I watched the beads sway back and forth as her whole body shook with quiet sobs. It relaxed me, provided me with a moment of clarity. Faith is all I needed. All I wanted in that moment was my estranged mother. Michael didn't bother asking me where I'd been for the past hour. We didn't talk for the rest of the time we waited. Only 3 seats separated us, but it might as well have been an ocean. The damage was done. I asked every nurse that walked through those white doors if they knew what had happened to my baby. None would answer. The doctor will speak to you is all I managed to get from any of them. A couple of nurses walked out crying. One banged the doors as she ran out towards the toilets, gagging the whole way there. Finally, 4.5 hours later, the doctor walked out. Michael and I rushed towards him at the same time, begging him to tell us that she's okay. I held onto Michael's arm as my head spun. You both need to sit down. My voice caught in my throat. Again, I thanked God for Michael being there by my side. Tell me what's happened. Is she okay? We couldn't get her mouth to open. We had to put her under anesthetic and, excuse me for this but there's no other way to say it, cut through her lips. I don't know how to explain. Her cheeks. When we cleaned up the blood, there seemed to be shapes carved into them on the inside. Tiny hexagon shapes. And bees. Hundreds of tiny bees just crawling around. I'm sorry. She's crying now that she's awake and her mouth is open, they're definitely causing her pain. But we can't get them out. Some started to die off during the procedure, but then it started to fill up with even more bees than before. I don't know what to do for her. I've never seen this before. Feeding is impossible. I can't get through the bees. Not long after that, Michael and I filed for divorce. Michael spends most of his time sitting at Jenny's grave, crying all over the tiny pink headstone he erected for her. I watch him sometimes from afar. I can't bring myself to go over to him. I can't tell him that he's crying over an empty grave. That my mother and I dug our baby out the same night she was buried. Jenny's a beautiful little toddler now, still in pain but alive again at least. I had to make some adjustments to our new home. Soundproofing the walls for a start, the screams can get so loud sometimes. My mother tried everything but she couldn't get rid of the bees. If anything, they've been joined by flies and maggots. The most she could do was bring my baby back. As for that other old bitch, we've had something in the works for a while now. We'll be ready soon. Story 9, repeat. 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 Some people collect cute souvenirs from the places they visit. I collect grainy pictures from haunted houses, and testimonies from people who claim to have seen the unexplained. UFO sightings, chupacabras, I'd sort them all. So when I got wind of the occurrences happening in a small town a day's drive away, I had to go. After a long day on the road, I pulled into the town exhausted, and after a bit of wandering I found myself in a pub. It was sparsely populated, given the after-dinner hour, but the counter looked well stocked with gleaming glass bottles, so it was good enough for me. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a scotch, double, neat as a pin. It arrived in front of me a few moments later, and with it came a grey-haired man, swaddled up in an oversized plaid coat. Once settled, pint in hand, he stared at me for a good long while. I stared right back, not one to break under a gaze, even one as steely as his. "Have you heard the rumors, son?" His breath was a puff of tobacco and booze. "Yeah," I replied, as nonchalantly as I could, playing down my interest. "I've heard a bit." He took a long pull of his beer, eyes casting lazily around the room. "Well, I thought I'd save you some time, and tell you to leave it alone. No need to go digging around, poking your nose where it don't belong." His tone, while not threatening, brokered no argument. The town had a secret that I was eager to uncover. An alarming number of people would go missing for a few days at a time, only to return unharmed, with no memory of where they'd been. It was also reported that they were different, not quite themselves. The changes ran the gamut from people suddenly developing an interest in new hobbies, or giving up drinking, to finding religion. Not much information was available, people coming forward only to be quieted down again by the local law enforcement, who claimed the rumors were all part of a mass hoax. Message boards, however, were ripe with theories, ranging from alien abductions to secret government experiments. I sipped my scotch, letting the silence play out as I studied the man beside me, broad-shouldered, wind-chapped face, and a hard line for a mouth. I idly wondered if maybe he was part of the town's police force, the ones who had been suppressing the rumors. Finally he spoke, voice gruff, as he leaned close. "Do yourself a favor, and just drop it." He pointed his index finger at my face, punctuating his statement. "Listen, mister," I said, fishing cash out of my wallet, preparing to leave. "I'm just passing through. So don't worry, I'll be out of your fine town soon enough." I threw a tip on the bar, grabbed my coat, and took a step toward the door. "Sam, let's not play this game again." His voice called from behind me. I froze, turning back slowly to face him. "I didn't tell you my name," I replied. "Are you a cop? Did you run my plates?" My voice remained calm, but inside I was struggling not to panic. Even as I was accusing him of being a member of the local PD, something at the back of my mind was screaming, telling me things were fundamentally wrong. "We've done this dance already, Sam." His eyes took on a pitying look. "No matter how many times we replace you, you just don't seem to want to turn out right. A cold sweat broke out across my back, my thoughts splintering as I tried to grasp at wisps of memories floating just out of reach. I lunged suddenly for the door, desperate to leave, my instincts pleading for me to run, run, run. Just check the cemetery. The man called as I all but tumbled outside, gulping in the fresh air, trying to regain my bearings. After managing to compose myself somewhat, the rational part of my brain once again firmly in control, I made my way to the bed and breakfast that I had booked for my visit. The quaint little house sat on the edge of town, painted butter yellow and surrounded by towering trees. It was peaceful, idyllic even, and I immediately felt better once I stepped inside. The proprietor and his wife were lovely, too, welcoming me like long-lost family. After they showed me to my suite, they excused themselves so that I could rest and refresh myself. Trying to push the earlier events at the pub from my mind, I showered quickly and turned in for the night. The bed was soft, a mountain of lush blankets and pillows, but I couldn't fall asleep. My brain was buzzing, going over the man's words, filling me with a strange sense of dread. I had almost convinced myself that he was clearly an overzealous cop, having managed to once again talk myself down from a precipice of paranoia, when a thought pierced through my mind. I jolted upright out of bed. The man at the tavern hadn't been the only one to act like he knew me. When I checked into the B&B, the owner had made a comment, which I hadn't noticed at the time. He'd told me not to worry, that the room I would be staying in was pet-free. It didn't seem like much, but I wondered, how did he know I was allergic to cats? I leapt out of bed, grabbing my clothes from a pile on the floor, and ran out to my car. A few minutes later my headlights cut through the fog of the cemetery. A flashlight in my hand, I stepped out, padding silently over the grass. Somewhere overhead an owl's call echoed, a symphony of crickets answering. I moved slowly, carefully sweeping my flashlight's beam over every headstone and tree, the inexplicable sense of paranoia having now fully taken hold. I had a lingering feeling of déjà vu, and my feet seemed to know the way, even if I didn't. Near the back of the cemetery sat rows of fresh graves, the headstones and plaques still shiny and new. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I knew then, deep within myself, what I would find. Sam Miller. Sept 5, 1982, August 20, 2018. My name. My birthday. I swept my eyes down the row, pausing briefly on each grave, all of them mine, but each with a different death date. I counted 12 before I collapsed on the grass, head clutched in my hands. I frantically retraced my memories, working backward from the present, reaching into the recesses of my mind. Cemetery, hotel, tavern, road trip. And then, blank. Nothing. I couldn't remember anything prior to August 20th. Story 10, I'm so sorry. It was late last night when my friend sent me a text. It was raining. I love it when it's raining because the sound of the water droplets against my window helps me relax and go to sleep. At first I didn't check my phone. I was laying in bed, mesmerized by the moon-cast shadow of the water running down my window that was on the adjacent wall. The first text came in, and I heard my phone chime, but I didn't take my tired eyes off the wall. Then, after I couldn't tell how long, I got another 2 texts back to back. That's what finally woke me from my trance. I pick up my phone, and I see that the first text was some picture with a bunch of text in it, but the next one says hey, followed by please help me. I got worried and sat up in my bed while furiously typing a response. I apologized for not seeing it sooner and wondered what was wrong and how I could help. Her reply was strange. Please help. I am freezing out here. I replied asking if she was outside my house while simultaneously getting up from my bed to check for her at my door. No one was there, but I got a reply right after closing the door. I needed your help. I stared at my screen, worry was filling my mind by the bucket loads. My fingers moved so fast I thought they'd fly off, and thank God for autocorrect. I practically demanded she tell me what was going on and how I could help. I wasn't sure if it was my nerves or maybe the heat went out in my house, but I was getting cold too. I paced out of worry and to keep warm, the whole time staring at the screen waiting for those three dots to tell me she's typing. Finally, a reply. If only you'd read my first text sooner. I was freezing and needed your help, but now it's too late. I was confused at first, so I scrolled back and checked the text. I noticed the first one she sent me and sighed a breath of relief as I spotted the header, "Send this to your closest friend or be haunted tonight." So obviously she's pulling a prank, trying to tell me she's haunted now or something. Just out of curiosity, I read it, and it all made sense why she was saying what she said. The post read, "In the year 1894, during an immense snowstorm, a young girl named Lily was found outside her home, frozen to death. Her superstitious parents said that they'd heard what sounded like Lily calling for help outside, but they had only just tucked her in moments prior, so they believed the voice to belong to what they called a Wendigo. To this day, people sometimes hear her calling out for help, and if they refuse to help then they will freeze in their sleep overnight." I'll admit, while I didn't believe it, it did kinda scare me, but not nearly as much as the disclaimer at the bottom, which read, "I'm so sorry, but the only way to save yourself is to trick someone else into reading the story. The worst part is, she won't let them go. Whoever you send this to is doomed either way, you just better hope they read it before she gets you, too." And now I sit here in my room, freezing cold, hearing the voice of one of my closest friends outside calling for help, but she was discovered this morning frozen to death in her bedroom. So I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but I hope you read this before I succumb to the cold. Good luck, and again, I'm so sorry. Story 11, my stepmom is an interior designer, and she bought a cabin in the woods. I already know what you're thinking. Here we go again with the same old cabin in the woods on r/nosleep. But everything I am about to tell you is true, just hear me out. I think it's a cliché too, and that's half of my frustration. At the beginning of the summer my stepmom used all my dad's money to buy a cabin in the woods. She's huge into interior design and wants to start off her own company. Sadly, my dad pushed me to help her all summer. Something about bonding, yeah right. He just didn't want to be responsible for me. I still agreed to help my stepmom, Cheryl. She was nice and all, and she meant well. But after all, she is the one who split my parents up. Not with an affair, but she convinced my dad that he wasn't happy and the rest is history. It was late May and the cabin was in Saratoga, Texas, so about 2 hours away from my small town, Dayton. I know it must be stupid to give away these details, but trust me, they're important. Saratoga is notorious for being a haunted mine community. Cheesy, right? Well, that's what I thought. More specifically, there's an 8-mile road in Saratoga, known as Bragg Road or Ghost Road, if you're a local. It's only 8 miles long, but it is such a straight and narrow shot, most people believe it is much longer than that. Some go as far to say that anyone who lives in Saratoga are really dead and don't exist. Lucky for me, I got to stay in the hell cabin that was just a few yards off Ghost Road. No, what I experienced was not a spooky ghost miner or anything of that sorts. When we first got to the house it smelled like mildew. Bad mildew. The humid Texas air didn't make it much easier to handle. So we opened all the windows in hopes that it would air out. Spoiler, it didn't. The house still had power, so we did get to turn on the AC while we worked. We started with the upstairs so we can make our way down with the debris. The floorboards were dusty and slightly bubbling up due to the humidity. We dusted everything first. To my surprise, the cabin was truly beautiful. Rustic, but something was so eerie. I just shook it off thinking I was spooking myself after reading all the horror stories online. Next we had to clean the windows. They were all foggy with mold and dirt. I grabbed some Windex and a whole roll of paper towels and started going after one window in a small room on the second floor. I saw a dark shadow behind the window. I jumped, but it mimicked my movement, so I assumed it was my shadow. I continued scrubbing at the window, but my music playing from my phone stopped. Which is truly the most annoying, because I was in the middle of a really good song by Haller. I left the paper towel on the ground and walked to my phone. Nothing would play, just this high ringing noise, Almost like a whining noise was coming from my phone. Ugh. I groan and just toss my phone on the chair next to me. I turn back to the window and my shadow disappeared. The noise kept getting louder and louder. I call out for Cheryl, but I can't even hear myself over the noise. I look into the window and now I could see my reflection. There was someone behind me. A tall, pale girl. She had matted black hair, with hollow pits where her eyes should sit. She had an olive tone peeking from under her thin skin. It looked like her arms went on forever. I'm frozen in fear, no longer holding my ears, staring at my reflection in the window. The noise isn't coming from my phone, but coming from the creature standing behind me. It looked like her jaw was broken from how wide her mouth was hanging. Her jaw just kept sinking closer to the floor as she kept getting louder. And just like that the world goes blurry then black. It was maybe a few hours and I wake up to Cheryl hovering over my body. "You take a good nap?" She laughed. "What?" I ask. Dumbfounded. As if she never heard that noise. "How long have you been laying here, silly? You cleaned up these windows really well." I sit up and look around. All the windows in the room are completely spotless. I just touch one eyebrow in confusion. "Wow," I whispered. Maybe I did fall asleep and I dreamt it all. "Well, come on, I'm starving," she says, and I follow her. We get in the car and drive to the closest store, which was in Rye, and really it was just a glorified gas station that served barbecue. A Texan classic. We got some food and sat at a table they had in the back. I tried to eat, but I couldn't get the image of that thing out of my head. Oddly enough, I'm not really even scared at this point. Just confused. The more I think of it, the more I want to know it. "Cheryl," I say. "Did you hear that really loud noise earlier? In the cabin?" By her look of her confusion, I'm assuming she's about to say no. "No? Why? Are you talking about that scream music you listen to?" She laughs. I wanted to correct her and tell her I don't listen to scream music anymore, but I fought the urge. I fake laugh. "Yay, maybe." Later on we made it back to the cabin and set up air mattresses. I decided to sleep in the room where I saw that girl/thing/whatever the hell you want to call it. I was so drawn to that room. Cheryl chose to just stay in the living room downstairs. I couldn't sleep for a while. But when I started to get close to sleeping, I heard someone calling my name from out my window. Considering I'm on the second floor, it was a bit concerning. But I didn't even question it for a heartbeat. I shot out from under the blankets and tiptoed downstairs and then outside. You must think I'm crazy for following the voice, but I needed to. I ran into the woods after the voice. They called my name so sweetly. I wanted to hear it even louder. But what I saw stopped me in my tracks. There she was. But she wasn't scary looking anymore. She was still pale, but she didn't have that ugly green undertone. Her hair was clean and dry, a silky dark brown color. And that horrific jaw was where it was supposed to be. However, those eyes were still missing and I still couldn't stop staring into them. "Wow," I whispered. "We missed you." And a grin stretched from ear to ear. Quite literally. Her lips stretched like a rubber band about to snap. They stretched so thin her lips almost disappeared. I blinked once, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in that same room. This time, I had blood on my hands. Story 12, The Crow and the Rat. It was the first time I went with Ma on a ride. It was a short ride, which is only about a 6-hour drive one way, and I was about to turn 13. Dad was already on a 3-day haul and I was able to convince Ma to take me with her, promising to help out whenever she needed and generally being a good boy. As much as I wanted to go, sleep would keep me grumpy and grouchy, and I never realized that starting on rides like this meant leaving the house by 6 a.m. so you can go by the best route possible and also be back before the end of the day. "If you're not up and out in about 10 minutes, I am going to lock you in and leave," Ma yelled, after I fussed for the last time. Just the tone of her voice was enough to make me jump out of bed and run to get ready. She had me get in the truck and we were out, but it was already way past 6 by then. She made some ill-tempered joke about having to take me for a real ride and I'd better be on my best behavior. We reached the place where we had to load up her truck in about a couple of hours and she introduced me to the guys, and this one lady who looked mad all the time, who worked there. They mostly had me stay out of the way, watching in awe at these forklifts loading up her truck with crates of whatever it was. We hadn't even loaded her truck fully when my stomach started rumbling in hunger. I alerted my mom of the situation as meekly as possible, lest I embarrass her. She told me we would stop for lunch in the first stop as soon as we hit the highway and handed me a protein bar to keep my rumbling stomach satiated until then. As soon as we got back on the truck I was exclaiming to my mom about how excited I was to eat my first truck stop meal with truckers, and she continued joking around and laughing and all was well. The first truck stop came around in an hour and I was excited to be eating grown-up food with some truckers that I almost yelled as I jumped down from the truck. I motioned to my mother that I wanted to tinkle before we went in for food. My mother just said hurry up, as she stood right outside the men's room waiting for me to come out. It was really embarrassing me, enough to make me grouchy in spite of having promised Ma that I would be on my best behavior. Next she did something even worse. She ordered the burgers and fries to go. I couldn't believe it. Not only did she already know how hungry I was, she also knew how much having this meal here meant to me. I wouldn't have it. I lunged at the to-go meals and ran out to get away from my mother. I ran out the truck stop and through whatever direction my feet carried me. My ears started ringing as a musty smell teased my nostrils. I knew I heard my footsteps and the rustling of leaves beneath my feet, but I also heard rustling of leaves behind me. As I stopped transfixed by the black feather dangling in front of my face, the call of a crow brought me back to reality. It was her, it was Car. She seemed younger and older somehow, the creases and dots still donned her face, some in the same places while some were different. It is hard for me to tell you how my memory from years ago could place something like that, but Car was the same and yet different every time I saw her. For the first time, I saw her eyes carry a form of madness and the lines of her face expand as her mouth spread into a wide grin, revealing yellow and brown broken mass of teeth and a tongue that moved like a blood tentacle, but I was neither disgusted by it nor afraid of it because none of the malice I could feel was toward me. I heard twigs crack as a hoarse shriek escaped her mouth and then a thud. She looked to me and nodded no. As she had spoken the first time, with no movement of her lips, she did again, "Go to your mother. She knows." It was now that I realized where her cold hands had rested on my shoulder. I took a couple of steps back and turned to see a man on his back on the ground, slick greasy hair covering his head and face, some weird tattoos on his arms which were exposed by an ill-fit half-slashed filthy rag of a t-shirt and piercings that stuck out in odd places. An awful stench filled my nostrils as I tried to get away, running back to Ma. I turned round to see Car one last time to thank her, only to see that there were a bunch of rats struggling and biting each other, roughly forming the shape of the man I had left behind me. Before I knew it, my feet carried me back into the arms of my Ma, who was by now on call with the police, who thanked them and confirmed I was safe, and hugged me crying. I too cried. I didn't understand what had happened. After the drop-off, after we had reached home, after my mother made sure I had a good night's sleep, after I had the comfort of the presence of both my dad and my Ma, she finally told me her side of the story. Apparently, the guy had been eyeing me since I jumped off the truck excitedly. My mother had been keeping a close eye on me as she had had a very bad feeling in the pit of her stomach about his glare. She lingered outside the restrooms just to make sure he didn't go after her. After we had gone into the food stop, she noticed that he had sat by the door. The horrible feeling that she got didn't go away, and that's when she had asked to make the order to go. As soon as I had grabbed the bag and ran out, the man left and followed me, even before my mom could chase after us. By the time she stepped out, we were nowhere to be found and she broke down. She immediately called the cops, imagining the worst. While she was still on the 911 call, I came running into her arms, scared and emotional. She thanked them and hung up, crying, hugging me. I just held my amulet that Car had given me and muttered an apology to Mom, but no amount of pleading would make her let me on another haul. I didn't tell her about Car yet. I felt I should at some point, but right then it wasn't time. And it wouldn't be for another 3 or so years. It wasn't until I was 16 and learned how to drive that my mother let me on another truck ride. And, it wasn't until I was 16 that I inevitably wound up meeting Car, yet again. Story 13, when we found out one of our family heirlooms was haunted. Before I was born, my grandfather died and handed down to us his great-great-grandmother's old owl vase. Though it's not really a vase, it's more of an old green pot shaped like an owl. It looks handmade because the owl is misshapen with these massive blank eyes. Years later I remember my dad finding out it was worth £100 from some antiques dealer who told him old folksy handmade antiquities were becoming fashionable. My mum didn't want to sell it because it's been in her family for so long, but my dad said us kids would break it or the cat would, so they might as well get some money out of it. She caved and we sold it. Dad took Mom out for a nice lunch to make her feel better, which is when things started to get weird. So it was only me and my older brother in the house at the time, and I was out in the garden playing. It started to rain, so I came back in through the kitchen and into the living room. My brother was in the living room and he gets up and goes to the kitchen but comes back to shout at me for opening all the drawers and cupboard and leaving them open. He was a neat freak. At first I think he's playing a prank on me because I just walked through the kitchen and I didn't open anything. In fact, I was pretty sure all the doors were closed because I would have noticed otherwise. I argue with him and then I go into the kitchen and he's right, someone had opened up all the doors. I argue that he did it and this argument goes back and forth between us until he tells me not to do it again. He assumed I was trying to avoid trouble, while I assumed he was messing with me. He closed all the doors and we go back to the living room. Later I go back into the kitchen and the doors are open again. I show my brother and we both freak out because none of us went in there after he closed the doors again. We tell our parents when they get home but they ignored us. The next day me and my brother are in the garden and we hear our mom shouting at us to stop running around upstairs. We run inside and we told her it's not us. She then blames the cat, but we tell her the cat was in the garden with us. She went upstairs, kitchen knife in hand, but there was nothing up there. She claimed that the noise must have come from our next door neighbors. Over the next week our Poppy, our cat, started acting weird. She started to yowl loudly during the day, which annoyed our neighbors. She started to scratch at doors, run in and out of rooms, stare at corners of the room and hiss at nothing. My dad thought she was in heat and being bothered by tomcats, so he locked her inside. Yet whenever we arrived home from school she tried to run out of the house past us. One day we got home and she was gone. She had forced the cat flap open and had run away. At the same time we still get drawers opening, objects moving around the house or going missing. My dad got angry because he thought we're doing it and hid his work shoes. We tell him it's not us, it's something else in the house. He mocked us and told the thing to give him back his shoes. As he said that the shoes fly through the door and hit him. We run out the room but nothing is there. Our dad just tells us to stop talking about it. I think it really scared him. Other than the cat running away, everything was mostly harmless. The incidents started to calm down too, or at least we stopped noticing them as much, which is why I think it got worse. One morning my mom woke the house up screaming because all the sharp kitchen knives piled up on the end of their bed. Another day we were all in the living room. My mom had a scented candle lit on the window, but the smell of lavender became mixed with a burning smell. We turned round to see the candle had tipped over and started a small fire. After putting it out, my dad banned lit candles in the house. The last incident broke my parents to do something. I was having a bath and I dunked under the water to rinse my hair when I felt hands hold me under the water. I panicked and tried to push them off, but I felt nothing but colder water. After a while I felt a wave of calm come over me and I stopped struggling. I blacked out but woke up on the bathroom floor coughing up water. I got up to run out the door, but I had locked it from the inside and I couldn't open it. My hands felt numb and useless like jelly on the lock to open it. My dad broke down the door to get me out. My brother said my lips had turned blue. My parents had a crisis meeting after that and I refused to stay in the house. I heard my mum mention to my dad that her hairdresser recommended trying an Ouija board to see if it's a spirit and what it wants. I don't know how it went fully because my mum sent us over to a friend's house, but years later she told me it just kept spelling the word owl, 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 owl over and over again. I know this must be true because after this my dad tracked down the guy he sold the owl vase to and brought it back, after paying double what he sold it for too. He still complains about that. With the owl vase returned, the weird stuff stopped and Poppy came home. The vase is still in the family, but me and my brother made sure my parents will pass it on to someone else in the family in their will. Story 14, you know the tingling feeling you get when the door to a dark room is partially open? Next time, just ignore it. I wish I had. The door was open at the end of the hallway. Not fully, as if someone had just walked through, but open just slightly, enough to see a dark strip of inky black. I wondered if I should get up to close it. It wasn't as if it mattered, no one else was home, and it shouldn't be bothering me. But something about the dark space between the frame and door was causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I felt like I was being watched. I looked down at the cat, whose soft snoring at the end of the couch provided me with some comfort. Weren't animals supposed to be able to sense danger? Surely if I had anything to worry about she wouldn't be curled up in a ball dreaming peacefully. Rationalizing myself into a small amount of courage, I decided to pull the soft, warm throw off of my lap and get up. As I stood, something caught my eye. It wasn't unusual for my husband to leave his things about the house. He often jokes that his creative mindset makes him incapable of being tidy. I walked over to the raincoat that had been draped over the stairway banister. It was pouring outside. Why would he have left his raincoat? Having now made it a quarter of the distance down the hallway to inspect the coat, I could see the door frame more clearly now. Was the door open another inch? Surely it was just my imagination. Thunder erupted outside, making me jump. I admonished my cowardice. You're a grown woman, Jen. It's a goddamn door. I hastened my pace to the end of the hallway and shut the door with a sharp thud. There. At 2 in the morning I woke to another deafening crack of thunder. After looking at the clock through bleary eyes, I rolled over to see if Stephen had made it home yet. His workload had become heavier as of late, and his evenings were often beginning to stretch well into the early morning. I sighed in frustration and picked up my water glass on the bedside table. I made way downstairs to the kitchen, but as I reached the bottom of the stairs I realized Stephen's coat was missing. Babe. No answer. Stephen, are you home? Nothing. Surely I put it away earlier, and in my haste to close the office door I forgot that I had hung it in the closet. Stephen should really stop working so late. Too much time alone is turning me into a crazy person. As the kitchen light flickered on, my eyes filled with bright white splotches. I blinked them away, heading for the refrigerator. It was then that I saw Stephen's raincoat neatly folded on the table. I did a double take. Why would it be in here? I was certain that after I had shut the office door earlier I had returned to the living room, scooped up my laptop, and headed straight to bed. I stood staring for another moment before realizing that it was completely silent, save for the sound of soft footsteps coming down the hallway. The cat must have woken and found me missing from the bed. She never much liked being more than a few paces away from my warm feet. I turned to the door, expecting to greet her, when I heard the office door across the hallway creak, and her footsteps continue on the other side. Okay, Jen. What in the actual fuck are you on? That damn door was closed. Katie? Katie cat, come here baby. I waited to hear her feet patter towards me. Silence Katie cat, what are you doing? Katie? With a frustrated sigh, I pushed the swinging kitchen door open and stepped into the hallway. The office door was shut. I took the stairs 2 at a time as I made my way back to the bedroom. I yanked the charge cord out of my phone and dialed Stephen's number. You've reached the voicemail of Stephen Whitney. I am not available to take your call at this time. I jabbed the phone screen to end the call and threw my phone down on the bed. Damn it. This is ridiculous. I decided to go back down to the office and face my fears. It was an office, not a haunted house. I had obviously been spending too much time watching horror movies and needed to see for myself that nothing was going on but an overactive imagination. I picked up my cell phone and gripped it tight. As I exited my bedroom, I found Katie at the top of the stairs, lazily licking her paws. I flipped on every light switch that I passed in an attempt to calm my nerves. When I turned on the hallway light, I looked toward the office door. Shut, just like it was supposed to be. I glanced at my phone to see if Stephen had called back. No such luck. When I looked up from the screen, I felt a nice cold chill shoot up my spine. The door was open about 2 inches. Despite the hallway light being on, it was total darkness on the other side. I considered calling the police. Perhaps someone had come in the house while I was sleeping. Had I checked to make sure the doors were locked before I had rushed upstairs to bed? My throat was tight. Every part of my body wanted to run in the opposite direction. But I stayed my course, walking toward the office. The hallway suddenly seemed an entire football field in length, and it took an eternity to finally reach the door. I licked my dry lips and swallowed hard as I pushed the door open. Stephen? Silence. I turned on the light. The room was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief and brought the phone to my ear once again. Jen? Stephen replied. Jesus Christ, Stephen, where the hell are you? Why didn't you pick up? Is everything okay? What's wrong? Sigh. No. Sorry, it's nothing. I think I'm just getting myself worked up over nothing. Will you be home soon? I'm on my way home now, honey. Just get some sleep and I'll be there in about 15 minutes. Hearing his voice had calmed me down. I felt my heart rate return to normal as I took one last glance across the room. As I turned toward the door, I noticed the rug had been moved. It was usually centered under the 2 chairs in front of the fireplace, but was now askew. I moved the chairs back and began to straighten the heavy area rug when something caught my eye. There appeared to be a red stain on the hardwood. With a quick pull, I folded the rug back to get a better look. On the floor before me was a large pentagram with strange markings around the edges. It appeared to have been painted onto the floor in blood. I lost my breath and fell from a crouch to a sitting position. Jesus fucking Christ, what is this? As I rounded the corner out of the office, Stephen walked in the door, raincoat in hand. Wasn't that supposed to be in the kitchen? I pushed the kitchen door open to see an empty table. My heart was trying to pound its way out of my chest. I suddenly didn't want Stephen home very much. Hey hun, sorry I'm home so late. Apparently the client doesn't like you look like you've seen a ghost. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Jen? How do you accuse your husband of dabbling in the occult? Hey honey, how's work? How are your satanic rituals going? My mind was spinning and I was afraid to even take a breath. I finally pulled myself together and spoke. Stephen, what did you do to the floor? I choked. The floor? The floor, Stephen. Why did you paint that symbol under the rug? With a look of confusion, he stepped toward me. I involuntarily flinched, reaching for the kitchen door. I made a mental note of which knives were closest in case he got violent. Stephen walked past me and into the office. What the fuck, Jen? He said with genuine shock. You didn't do this? No. When would I have time to draw bloody symbols on the floor? I've been working 80-hour weeks. I barely sleep, let alone have time to devil worship or whatever the fuck this is. I immediately felt stupid. It was true, he was hardly ever home anymore. I sighed with relief and walked across the hall and into the kitchen to fill a bucket with water. Stephen grabbed a couple of sponges and old towels from the pantry so we could start scrubbing the office floor. It was too early in the morning and my eyes were dry from exhaustion, but I couldn't leave those blood-drawn symbols on the floor all night long. It wasn't as hard as I had anticipated to scrub the blood off the floor. It didn't appear to have been sitting there long enough to stain, for which I was thankful. That was, until I realized it meant the blood was fresh. I expressed my concern to my husband, but in his tired and frustrated state he brushed it off, saying something about the varnish on the floor. I supposed he was right, but it didn't settle my fears. I folded the now ruined area rug and tossed it in front of the fireplace as I headed upstairs to bed. Over the next few months things returned to normal. I had taken a new job at a finance firm and was now the one working long hours. Stephen's department had brought in a new batch of interns, which meant he wasn't needing to stay at the office quite so late anymore. As I was packing up my things to leave the office one evening, Stephen called. "Jen, I need you to come home." He sounded panicked. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" No. It's just, Katie is missing. I can't find her anywhere. Can you make it home before it's too dark? I'm afraid she got outside again." I gathered my purse and briefcase and drove home as fast as I could. Stephen was in the backyard yelling for Katie. It wasn't like her not to respond when called. I worried about hawks and other animals. After all, she was a tiny little thing. Nothing? I asked Stephen. "No. This is so strange. The other times she's always come when I called. For the life of me I don't understand how she keeps doing it." "Doing what? What do you mean the other times?" He explained that over the last couple of months Katie had been finding a way to get outside. At first he thought the screen door hadn't latched properly, or that she was running past him as he brought in groceries. He would notice she was gone, call for her, and she would run right up to him, wrapping her furry little body around his legs. I looked out past the lawn and into the trees. Could she have walked through the woods to the neighbor's farm? "Katie cat, Katie. Come here kitty girl." As I suspected, nothing. My mind was pulled back to that image of the pentagram on our office floor. This was right about the part of the horror movie where the family dog ends up dead. I worried for Katie. I hoped that nothing bad had happened. We woke up the following morning, put on our rain gear, and headed out to the woods to look for the cat. I brought a can of tuna, hoping to entice her. About 3/4 of the way to the tree line I spotted the carcass of what looked to be a small animal, possibly a raccoon. It appeared to have been dead for some time. "Where the hell are you, Katie?" A few yards into the trees I noticed something didn't feel right. It was as if the air was too still. There were no cicadas buzzing, no crickets chirping. Not a single bird in sight. Once again, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Katie cat. Katie, where are you?" I yelled. My voice echoed around the trees, but the only response was dead silence. I looked at Stephen to voice my concern, but before I could open my mouth we heard a loud shriek coming from the woods to our left. Stephen darted off towards the noise, and my legs burned to keep up with him. He slowed as he approached a clearing and stopped before passing the last tree. "What is it?" I asked. He stood there, frozen, as if the air was too thick for him to move. A familiar chill crawled its way up my spine as I turned my attention to the clearing in front of me. There, drawn in what appeared to be gallons of blood, was a massive pentagram. Animals of all shapes and sizes were hanging from the trees, their bellies gutted. Entrails littered the forest floor. The stench hit me, and a wave of nausea caused me to fall to my knees and vomit. As I regained my footing, I saw that Stephen was now laying in the center of the pentagram. A naked woman stood over him, using blood to draw symbols on his bare chest. I heard a twig snap behind me and nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned to find Katie sitting there, carefully licking her paws. She appeared unfazed by the carnage all around us. The woman turned her attention to me. Her body was covered in the same strange symbols she had drawn on Stephen. Her hair was soaked so thick with blood I couldn't tell if she had started out brunette or blonde. "You need not bother with Katie, dear. She's quite fine." The woman drawled. "Who are you? You need not bother with that either." "I don't understand." "Why, of course not. You and your husband have been rather oblivious for quite some time now. My Katie has been keeping an eye on you. She tells me you have removed the glyphs she drew in your office." "Katie drew those symbols?" "Yes, dear. It appeared that while your husband was having an affair, you were spending the evenings drinking and passing out early. This gave me all the time I needed to use your office for my work. Your home happens to be at the intersection of some very important ley lines." "Oh, sorry, dear. You thought he was working late, didn't you? It's unfortunate that you decided to break your bad habit right as I was meeting some of my, well, let's call them goals. Our work was almost finished. I felt lightheaded and so sick I could barely stand. Run, Jen. Call for help. Don't just stand there. You see, that pentagram was the last phase of my plan. When you broke the seal by wiping it away, you undid a massive amount of very difficult spell work. It turns out that despite all my efforts to reconjure those spells, animal blood simply isn't going to cut it this time. The gods are demanding a human sacrifice. Shall we see if opening up your husband will do the trick? I fell to the ground. Her right hand rose into the air, a golden dagger gleaming in the sunlight. As her blade began to move downward, I felt a sharp pain in my head, and blackness enveloped me. Story 15, Send help. I know that no one's going to believe this, but I don't know what else to do. I'm trapped, and this is all I have. A few days ago I went to Starbucks to get some writing and commissions done. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Starbucks on the other side. It was a featureless white room, with a blank black figure standing at the center. It was like a hole the shape of a person had been cut into reality, revealing the void on the other side. Maybe about 7 feet tall. It had no eyes, no features, but somehow, I could tell it was staring into me. In that moment, I felt the deepest, coldest, most terrible dread I've ever experienced in my life. I went straight into panic attack mode, and almost threw up on the spot. I closed the fucking door, went home, puked, and curled up in my bed shaking and freaking out. When I tried to leave the house a few hours later to take out the trash, I wasn't about to venture out any further than that after what had happened that morning. Instead of outside, it was just the blank white room and the blank figure. I thought that maybe if I just stepped through the door, I'd snap out of it and I'd be outside. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes trying not to throw up again until I managed to step over that barrier. I was hit with instant freezing cold. I screamed automatically but no sound came out, and when I tried to inhale after that, there was nothing. No air, no anything. The blank figure was walking towards me. I practically fell back into the house and slammed the door. I tried all of the windows. I could see outside through them, but as soon as I pulled off the screens and put my head through, there'd just be the white room and the figure. Every time I did that, he seemed to be a little closer. At that point it finally occurred to me that I was probably having a nightmare, so I just laid down in bed and hoped I'd wake up in reality if I went to sleep in the dream. That made sense to me at the time, I'm not sure why. I managed to doze off for a bit and when I woke up, I tried to leave my room. But when I opened the door, the blank room with the void man was waiting for me on the other side. My room has no window. I've been banging on the door and shouting, hoping that if one of my roommates hears it and they open it from their side, I'll be able to get out. But so far no one's come, and it's been almost 3 days. My hands are bleeding, bruised and swollen now and it hurts to type. I've never had hallucinations before, not even on shrooms. I'm not crazy. And if I am, I need someone to come get me out of here and take me to a mental hospital. Please, please, please believe me. This is real. Please send someone, anyone to check on me, I don't care who. Please send help. My address is 3211 Faust Boulevard, Bloomstown, Michigan 49686. He's knocking now. Story 16, Acluophobia. Growing up, I wasn't really afraid of the dark. I had a nightlight, my teddy bear, my rocket pajamas, race car bed and blankets, and my mom and dad sleeping in the other room, just across the hall. 13 years later, give or take a few, is when things began getting abnormal. Not with puberty, or anything like that. No, this was something else. I don't really know how to explain it with words, other than that it wasn't normal. It all started one night when I was 14. I was going to my room to lay down for the night. My parents for the longest, since I came into my teenage years said that I should stop sleeping with a nightlight because it makes me look like a sissy, and that what I would tell my girlfriend if she asked if I was afraid of the dark. Anyway, my ritual was fairly simple, get into my boxers, turn on my nightlight, and turn off my room light, then go to sleep. But I decided to skip the second step. I shut the light off and darkness flooded into my room. It was like an abyss that I couldn't crawl out of, or that I was deathly blind and couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I waited a few seconds to let my eyes adjust and I made my way to my bed, albeit in a bit of a clumsy manner. When I laid in my bed, I usually thought about various things like schoolwork, maybe ideas for things to do with friends, and I would drift off to sleep without a peep. But this night was different. I was restless at first, tossing and turning in my bed. It was like I couldn't find any way to get comfortable. I tried my back, my sides, my stomach, nothing seemed to work. I was tempted to turn on my nightlight and let its soothing amber rays bathe over my body, but I told myself you're gonna stick this out. So I laid there, restless. What was supposed to be a peaceful, silent, and tranquil drift off into the ever-turning cocktail of hormones that swirled around in my mind and the various fantasies I would dream about doing with the girls I met, liked, and talked to, was the opposite. I lay there with a burning sensation inside my chest, a pit in my stomach that kept getting bigger and bigger. The shadows danced around me like demons, my synapses firing on all cylinders, bam, bam, bam. Panic rising in my chest more and more as the shadows crept closer and closer to my body. Breathing became harder and harder, like I was choking on the air in my lungs. I wanted to scream as loud as I could but no words came from my mouth. I nearly fell out of my bed, and the shadows descended upon me, clawing at my body. I felt their cold hands touch my skin, and draw gashes across me. I felt the hot, oily blood pulse from my veins, and spill down my arms and back. I yelled at the top of my lungs from the pain in my body, and out of desperation for it to stop. Moments later my door blasted open, the lights snapping on, and the blinding, piercing, burning white light that flooded my vision. I heard something clatter to the ground as I rushed to embrace my parents. They cradled me in their arms, and when they noticed the blood, they immediately rushed me to the hospital. I had gotten multiple stitches in each gash, and when they asked what happened I told them what I saw. Police got involved and eventually the trail went cold. My parents thought it would be a good idea to enroll me in therapy, to maybe help me out psychologically. I still slept with my nightlight on for the time. My therapist told me that I should try sleeping with the light off for change, and later that night I did. But even as I did my nightly ritual, skipping the step of turning on the nightlight, I immediately began to panic. My hands shook uncontrollably, and my whole body was in tremors. Again in the pitch blackness of my room, the shadows descended upon me, their talons sharper than ever, the teeth like razors feasted upon my wrists and I felt the blood beginning to run down my arms. I fell to the floor yet again, screaming in agony, and my parents rushed in, taking me to the hospital again. It was by this point, the doctor talked to me, and asked me if I was depressed, if I was suicidal. I told him no. Truthfully I wasn't. He then explained that the cuts on my wrists weren't by the shadows I had claimed they were. They were from me. I was baffled by it. It was impossible. I don't remember getting a knife from the kitchen, or my dresser and cutting myself. I would know, wouldn't I? My therapist came in immediately. When he started talking to me, he asked me all kinds of questions. If I was suicidal, depressed, ever feeling lonely, I told him no to all of them. And when he asked me about the dark, I described it to him. He then had the doctor restrain me, for safety, and proceeded to shut out the lights. Again, the panic hit me a moment later. I was hyperventilating, my heart was beating erratically in my throat, and I felt like I might hurl. I tasted a metallic tang in my mouth with a strong vinegar flavor to it. It was by this time the lights snapped on, and a piece of leather, from like a belt or something, was in my mouth. As the light bathed over me, I settled down, and I asked what happened. That's when they said I was shouting, "Turn on the lights. Turn on the lights. The shadows, they're here. Turn on the fucking lights." And that I was starting to bite my tongue out. My therapist said that I had clinical case of acluophobia. Or a deadly case of being afraid of the dark, to the point of being self-destructive if I'm so much as in it for too long. He said that when I'm in the dark I essentially become unaware of what I've been doing to my body. Taking a knife from the kitchen and stabbing myself in the back and arms. Taking another kitchen knife to my wrists and slashing them open and watching the blood pool around my wrists. Or biting my own tongue out in a frenzied panic. They said that the next time I try to sleep with the lights off, I might not survive it. My parents, the doctor, and my therapist stepped out into the hall of the ER to discuss what to do about me. The doctor smiled at me. "Sleep tight, sonny, you've had a long day." Then he shut out the light. Story 17, Appreciation from St. Charlotte's Hospital. Dearest employees, thank you for choosing St. Charlotte's for your new and exciting career choice. We here at St. Charlotte's Hospital welcome you all with open arms and loving hearts. Here are just some of the rules we hope you'll abide by while working here as a great asset to our already great team of nurses and doctors. 1. Remember, every day is a happy day, so turn that frown upside down. 2. Hygiene is a must. We here at St. Charlotte's Hospital would like to remind all new and existing employees that hand sanitizers can be found on all floors. 3. Whenever you are using the women's restroom on the 4th floor, we advise you not to look directly into the bathroom mirror, no matter who or what you see looking back at you. Failure in doing so will result in instant expulsion from the premises. 4. We do not have a 13th floor. We repeat, we do not have a 13th floor. Any persons talking and or heading up onto the 13th floor must be reported to the front desk immediately. 5. If the phrase "Charlie's cold dinner" is said over the intercom, we advise all staff and patients alike to head into the basement and await for further instruction. 6. If a patient of any kind signs into the hospital with the name of Seth Baxter, get up from wherever you are sat and call animal control immediately. No exceptions. 7. If approached by a young child wearing a red hooded jacket, we recommend not helping him undo his zipper on his jacket and instead send him on his way to wherever he had first come from. 8. Patients that have sadly passed on must be fully examined for any bites, scratches or unknown fluids before being brought down into the morgue. 9. Employees that are lucky enough to be put onto night shift must never leave any windows open, especially between the early hours of 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. 10. If asked by a Dr. Simon Coggs to assist him into surgery room 3, alert all surrounding staff of his offer before waiting patiently until the situation is dealt with accordingly. 11. In case of unknown blackout, we advise all new and existing employees to work by the rule of 3. Not letting your partners wander aimlessly down the many abandoned hallways we have here is shown to be a great team effort in all respected manners. 12. If for instance the rule above is forgotten and or ignored, we suggest that the remaining group personnel stick to the rules and to not go searching for any missing persons, no matter how far close or fair their voices may seem. 13. Depending on the day, if for whatever reason the surgical gloves begin to growl and hiss towards your outstretched hand, we here recommend that you kindly but firmly put them back. From all of us here at St. Charlotte's Hospital, we look forward to hearing from you shortly. Yours sincerely, Management. Story 18, Four Corners. 14 years now I've been an antiques broker. It pays the bills and then some, and it keeps me from getting bored. It started as a hobby back when I thought I'd be a stockbroker. That didn't last long. I wasn't made for Wall Street. But it seemed I had a nose for a good find and a knack for negotiation. Soon I had people asking me why I wasn't doing it full time, and I couldn't give them a good answer. I was never more happy than the day I quit the office and set out on the great treasure hunt. My usual territory is the area where I live, the burned-over district of upstate New York. It's called that because so many preachers and missionaries scoured the place in the 19th century that it soon became burned over of prospective converts. This is where the spiritualist movement began when the Fox sisters heard the rapping of a ghost, and where the Mormons got their start. It's been farmland since colonial times, and belonged to the Haudenosaunee before that. Like a lot of sparsely populated places, it has its share of things go there and stay. And like a lot of places, it has things that were there long before. We'll get to that. The lion's share of my work is attending estate sales and auctions. The rest come from referrals. People who know me know that I'm looking for the rare and the unique, so folks will pass along my card if someone comes in with something out of their specialty. More often than not it's some family heirloom that turns out to have more sentimental than monetary value. A few times a year there will be something I can flip for real cash. You have to be ready to sift through the rocks to find the ruby. I got the call while I was on the road. I'd gone to a town in western Massachusetts to check out an estate sale that turned out to be little more than a junk pile. Lots of stuff, none of it particularly valuable or unique. I didn't have the patience that day for stuff that was going to sit on eBay a year before someone met the reserve price. But that's the way, some days you come up empty. The woman on the other end of the phone identified herself as a Miss Button. She sounded cultured, her voice refined with a hint of an accent. Pleasantries were exchanged as she explained who had given her my contact info. I didn't recognize the name, but that's no bother. You can't remember everyone you meet. She proceeded to tell me of a collection of documents that had been in her family for generations, some going back to colonial times. Would I be interested in appraising them? I told her I would be interested, but that it would have to wait for another day as I was in western Massachusetts. This news only brightened her tone. As it so happened she lived in the area. Wondering at my luck, I took her address and made my way. This call would keep me out of my usual zone, but I didn't really mind. The drive through the Berkshires had been pleasant and the weather was clear and cool. Good day for a foliage tour for those in the mind for it. I stopped off at some local joint for lunch. The waitress was pleasant but couldn't give me any tips on local antique places, nothing that wasn't already in the newspaper I'd bought on the way in. The route took me northwest into that far corner of the state. Wasn't long before I was driving down one of those two-lane highways through places that didn't appear on a lot of maps. They belong to one town or another, these places, but they're called something else by the locals. Some name for a hamlet or farm that disappeared back in the 1830s. Things stick around here, they linger. It was mostly forest on either side of the lazily winding road. At one point I passed a gas station that looked like it hadn't been used since the Depression, rusting Texaco pumps standing silent vigil in front of the slowly imploding building. Half-hour later at a turn in the road I glanced to my left and saw a teetering shack straight out of some Appalachian novel, in front of which stood a shirtless hunchback paused in mid-drag to stare at my passing car as he moved scrapward from one pile to another. Something about the glare in his eye told me I shouldn't pause to ask for directions. It was mid-afternoon when I got to my destination. The sun had dipped behind the trees to create a gloomy atmosphere which combined with the remoteness of the place to fire my imagination. I was starting to wonder what kind of creepy old mansion in the woods waited for me. Then, I arrived. At least, my GPS said I was there. I was at a crossroads for two state highways, that I knew. But the place looked like it had fallen off the map long ago. Two of the four corners were undeveloped lots, while a third hosted the crumbling remains of what was once a convenience store, its facade boarded over with plywood. Out front were rusting gas pumps with stickers shouting "Contains lead" on their sides. The fourth corner was out of place for its neatness. The gravel-covered lot was completely free of plant life. It was occupied by an Airstream trailer, the kind that was popular when Ike was president. This one looked like it had just been wheeled out of the factory, its gleaming aluminium free of dents or streaks. A green big block Chevy truck of mid-70s vintage and in equally pristine condition sat beside it. Either one of these would have fetched a pretty penny at auction. Whoever owned those had to be a classic car nut with cash to spare. The gravel paving crunched underfoot as I stepped out of my car and approached the trailer door. As I walked I wondered at the silence of the place. I'm more a city boy even after living upstate all these years. I'm no woodsman. But I've been in the trees enough to know the sounds you hear there both in season and year-round. And right then, I wasn't hearing any of them. Only the sound of my own breathing, and the gravel under my feet. The quiet was slashed with the unusually loud squeal made by the opening trailer door. Standing in the doorway was a heavily made-up woman in her mid-30s dressed in a casual summer style from the early 60s. "Miss Button?" I asked. She smiled from beneath her oversized sunglasses and thanked me for coming on such short notice. I got the impression that her shoulder-length flip hairdo was a wig. Seeing her light clothing in this crisp autumn air gave me a shiver. At least, I think it was that. She invited me inside. I stepped up and into the airstream to find the inside matched the exterior. You would have thought this was a display model at some auditorium camping exposition. Not only was it in pristine condition, there was nothing to indicate anyone lived in it. No personal effects, no supplies, not even a coffee cup in the sink. I continued to scan the place as my prospective seller gestured like a showroom model towards the benches and table, asking me to sit. As I did, she turned to the fridge and pulled out an old-fashioned glass cola bottle. I could see from my seat that it was the only thing in there. She flipped the cap with something she must have had in the palm of her hand and set it before me. Before I could take it, she turned to a drawer and pulled out a single paper straw that she deftly stuck into the bottle. I thanked her and took a sip. Ice cold and bland as water. No sugar, no snap, nothing. It was so tasteless I lifted the bottle and peered at it in disbelief. Miss Button seemed not to notice as she made banal pleasantries before retreating to the other end of the trailer to retrieve an old wooden dispatch case. She sat down on the opposite bench and set the box between us, its opening facing me. Saying something about it being in her family for some time, she opened it to reveal several pages of vellum and parchment in different sizes and of different ages. I set my flavorless soda aside and gingerly began to examine the papers. What I saw before me had to be a hoax, a jape at my expense. This had to be a setup by a friend or a rival, with cameras recording my reaction. What I was seeing could not be real. On top was a copy of the Magna Carta. It had been neatly tri-folded and still bore the remnants of a broken wax seal. Beneath it was a facsimile of the Declaration of Independence. One of the first printed in 1776, if I was not mistaken. Beneath that, a letter signed by William Shakespeare to an unnamed woman that included what might have been an unpublished sonnet. I put these treasures down and looked into the deeply smoked lenses of my client's sunglasses. "Are these for real?" She nodded. "Every one. They're all from my father's collection. I'm wondering if you think they could be of any value?" I couldn't suppress a chuckle. "Miss Button, you're sitting on a gold mine here. Any one of these documents would make you a rich woman. Now, if you like, I could reach out to my contacts in Manhattan, put you in touch with one of the international auction houses. There would be a fee involved, of course, but even with my usual rate you would be guaranteed a big payday. As would I." Miss Button smiled appreciatively. "I'm glad to hear that. But, would you like to look at the rest of the documents? I believe you missed one at the bottom." "Sure, of course." I looked in the box once more and saw a folded piece at the bottom. Retrieving and unfolding it, I was at first unable to figure out what it was. The parchment was crisp and white, the ink a shiny black flecked with gold. The Latin text had been written out with a quill pen in a florid hand but for one word that had been crossed out and new text cribbed in. At the bottom, next to a thick X, another hand had shakily signed the document in a dark reddish-brown ink. I'd had a few years of Latin in prep school, so I tried working out what it all said. My eyes bugged out a bit when the letters seemed to writhe and blend like worms to reform themselves in modern English. The document was a contract from the year 1221 between one Robert de Bouton and someone styling himself as Prince of Shadows. It stipulated sundry powers and riches in exchange for an indefinite period of servitude. The signature appeared to be in blood. Now I knew I was being had. I looked square my client, my incredulousness fading to sternness. "Miss Button, I do not appreciate being taken for a fool." She smiled wider, and for the first time I noticed how pointy her teeth were. "All of them." "Oh, no, they're all real. I just want to know what I can get for them." I waved the contract. "You're trying to tell me this is real?" "Real as raisins." All of a sudden the light seemed to dim a bit. The smile faded into worry on Miss Button's face as she snapped her head to one side so quickly the wig atop it went slightly askew. "Oh, fudge. Daddy's coming." She closed the dispatch case and looked at me square. "Time to go." And with that, she removed her sunglasses. The world grew fuzzy for a moment as my head swam and a strange noise filled my ears. I shook my head to clear it and found myself sitting in the driver's seat of my car. The trailer and truck were gone. And the sun was rising in the sky before me. I checked the dashboard clock and saw it was mid-morning of the next day. I was about to write the whole thing off as a dream brought on by road fatigue when I noticed the vellum envelope on the seat next to me. A neat hand had written finder's fee in a feminine cursive with a quill pen. Inside was a Spanish doubloon. Story 19, Gracie and Mama. My Gracie was playing outside with her friend Louis. It was a typical Saturday afternoon. I was hanging the linens on the line to dry and I could hear the children laughing as they took turns pushing each other on the tire swing. Our yard was large, lush, and a striking green. It looked like the yard from Forrest Gump. I was hanging the white sheets when I saw a black shadow pass in front of me. It was definitely human. I jumped back with a fright. It took me almost a full minute to realize I didn't hear the kids anymore. I dropped the sheets and ran to where the swing was. The kids, they were gone. I dashed in the house and called the police. Crawford County. Before she could finish I was frantically telling her what happened. My daughter, and her friend Louis are gone. I saw a person walk in front of my sheets while I was hanging them and then the kids were gone. The woman on the other end sent the police out. Mom, you say you saw a person? The officer asked. She looked at me skeptically. Yes, I was hanging the linen and saw a figure walk in front of the sheet. All I could see was the outline but it was a person. The officer was writing all this down. Well, if that's all you have to go on, this case will be difficult. But we will start searching and Mom, please try to pull yourself together. I just looked at her with disbelief. She was not taking this serious enough. Louis's parents were on their way to my home. Natalie, where is my son? Louis's mom clung to me with tears streaming down her cheeks and some snot dribbling out of her nose. I don't know Beth, I don't know. My Gracie, you're Louis. I fell to the floor when she did, clinging tight to one another. Louis's father Shane just stood there watching with quiet tears streaming from his eyes. He didn't know what to do any more than we did. A week had passed by and the chances of our children's survival had dwindled down to nothing, according to the police. They told me that the first 48 hours was the most critical time and after that, survival rates dropped daily. Beth and Shane stopped coming by. I think they were already grieving the loss of their son. I wouldn't be surprised if they would give him a funeral soon. I wasn't giving up on Gracie though, she was my lifeline. I had to have hope, I had to believe she was alive. There were memories of her and my husband scattered all over the house. He had died 2 years previous, Gracie was only 3 when he left this world. I laid in my bed that night looking at the ceiling. There had to be something I could do. The cops had mostly given up on the investigation due to the lack of leads. There were no footprints and just my vague description of a shadow figure behind the linens. My mind began to wonder about not-so-conventional ways of locating the kids. I got out of bed and walked down to the basement. There were cobwebs, shelves lined with boxes, the washer and dryer, the humming of the light bulb and the noise of the deep freezer. I started rifling through the boxes on the shelves. Bingo! I had found it, the box with the old Ouija board. I took the box down and carried it upstairs. In the dimly lit dining room I sat the box on the floor by the sprawling table. I crouched down and my hand took hold of the board. I felt a shiver run up my spine. I didn't care. I shrugged off the feeling and sat down at the table with the board. I looked around the room. It was bigger than me and Gracie needed. As I was steadying myself to talk to the board I saw a shadow run across the room. I jumped, my heart racing. My grandma had always told me that the spirits didn't get active until after midnight. I looked at the clock, it was 11:58. They were starting to stir, or I was seeing things. Either way I was going to give this a try. I took the planchette and sat it on the middle of the board, barely touching it. I closed my eyes and focused on my husband. Dan, are you there? Nothing happened. Dan, our daughter is gone, are you there? I waited and the planchette slowly moved to yes. My heart was racing. Dan, you have to find Gracie, can you find her? Another yes. Oh my god. Okay, I had to breathe deeper. Dan, tell me where she is now. The board was still, then it finally moved. To know what? I yelled at the air. I didn't understand. I tried again. Dan, tell me where she is. No, I couldn't believe it. I threw the board across the room, breathing heavily, asking the room, why Dan? The next morning, I padded down the stairs and into the dining room. Everything was still the same as I had left it. The Ouija board laid on the floor and the planchette was sitting on the table. I looked at it with contempt, wondering as I walked in the kitchen to make coffee, why he wouldn't help find her. He knew where she was and a thought crossed my mind, maybe it wasn't Dan. He wouldn't not tell me where our daughter was, would he? At any rate, I decided I would try again that night. I went about my day, nothing out of the norm except when I went in Gracie's room. All of her dolls sat on their shelf, but they were turned facing the doorway, as if they had been waiting for me. I let out a yelp and slammed the door shut. I couldn't wait until night to talk to the board. I had to do it now. I ran down to the dining room and grabbed the Ouija. I sat it down on the table, grabbed the planchette and concentrated on Dan. Dan, this is Natalie. Are you there? Dan. The planchette spelled out hello. I said, look, I know that you know where Gracie is. Tell me now, Dan. No, and the board flew off the table. I was so angry, I took the board and shoved it in the box, and took it back to the basement. I could feel a pair of cold, unfeeling eyes on my back as I was putting the box back on the shelf. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. I searched the basement, nothing. I walked back upstairs, slamming the basement door shut. All I had to go on now was some spirit, Dan or something else had messed with me. Either way, it gave me hope that Gracie would be found. I tried to go on about my evening, but I was very disheveled from the day's earlier events. It was nearing 7 p.m. and a knock on the door startled me. I walked over to the front door and opened it. No one was standing in the twilight outside. Of course, why not? Wasn't that the theme for the day? I shut the door with a feeling of dread in my stomach. I felt fractured. It was 10 when I finally went to bed. I had been asleep for a couple hours when I felt a small hand touch my cheek. I opened my eyes. My vision was still blurry, but I could see her clearly. Gracie. I grabbed my daughter in a bear hug. I didn't let go for what felt like forever. She stood there and said nothing. She did nothing, she didn't move, and then I noticed she felt cold. I pulled back from her, looking at her face. Her eyes were pitch black, her skin was slightly grey and marbled looking. It looked as if her blood was just sitting in her veins. Her lips were purple. I pulled back in horror at the sight of my daughter. Gracie, what happened to you? I asked in my best calm voice. Gracie just turned and walked down the hall. I began following her. She went down the stairs and headed toward the basement. I kept following, slowing my step. She opened the door and went down the stairs. I followed her. I was scared out of my mind. Gracie with her black eyes turned to look and make sure I was still there. I was shaken to the core, but I was still there. She walked to the deep freezer and stopped. I looked at her confused. I was so scared and so lost. She raised one hand and pointed at the freezer. Her sweet angelic voice tinkled, "Open it, Mommy." The voice didn't match the eyes. "No, Gracie, I don't think I will. Why don't you come back upstairs with Mommy?" The little girl looked at me and in a deep guttural voice said, "No, open it, Mommy." I fell backward, landed on my ass and couldn't move. Gracie walked over and grabbed me by my hair and dragged me across the basement floor to the freezer. When I stood up, I gingerly opened the freezer. Inside was Dan, Gracie, and Louis. I heard screaming. It sounded manic, terrified, sad, just completely broken. It was me. I looked at Gracie in confusion. "Don't you remember Mommy?" In that same angelic voice. "Me and Louis were swinging and you ran to us and said you had seen a monster. You took us in here to protect us from the monster." Gracie and her black eyes never moved from me. She continued speaking. "Me and Louis thought you were playing a game with us. Then you said you had to protect us from the shadow man. You really started to scare us. Then you took a knife from the shelf over there." Gracie pointed at the shelves across the room. She was right, there sat a bloody knife. How had I not seen that knife when I was down there looking for the Ouija board? Why was Dan in the freezer? He was freezer burnt. He had been in there a while. I heard footsteps coming down into the basement. I was in utter shock, total disbelief when Lewis appeared next to Gracie. He asked her in his little 5-year-old voice, "Are we going to do it, Gracie?" Yes. Gracie's lips peeled back in a devilish smile, her gums were rotten. The children walked toward me, each one had a knife in hand. How the hell? It was fast. They were on me, stabbing and stabbing, laughing in their child laughter. The innocence did not match the act. I thought I was dead, but I woke up screaming. There was an orderly and nurse rushing toward me. "Natalie! Natalie, here, be still. Stick her, Tom." I felt a needle go in my neck. I laid back after fighting for maybe 30 more seconds. Taking note that I was in a white room alone, there were bars on my window. When I woke up I was escorted to an office. "Dr. Nettle, Natalie, tell me, what was your nightmare about?" The doctor looked at me expectantly. All I knew was, I was not supposed to be here. I didn't speak. "Natalie, were you dreaming of Dan again?" I looked at her that time. "Yes, and where is my daughter? Why am I in here?" "Natalie, you killed Dan. Do you still not remember?" I looked at her and she seen the shock in my eyes. "Natalie, you killed Dan, Gracie, and Lewis. Remember, you were apprehended in the basement of your home, you had stabbed yourself repeatedly." I had no idea what lies she was spewing about. "No, Gracie and Lewis stabbed me." "No, Natalie, you did it while you were in a psychotic state," the doctor continued. "And you also killed Dan in the same fashion." I looked at her with a steady gaze. "No, Dan died 2 years ago, he was in a car wreck that incinerated him." The doctor looked at Natalie over the rim of her glasses. "Natalie, we have been through this. Dan did not die in a car wreck. You killed him a few months ago. You uncovered an affair he had been having with a local woman. Natalie, you stayed in a psychotic state. You stabbed Gracie and Lewis to death during their playdate. No one had time to know that Dan was missing. Natalie, look at your stomach." I raised my shirt, there was bright red scars. "After you killed Dan and the kids, you were found in the basement with these self-inflicted wounds by Lewis's mom. She had come to get Lewis, he was spending the night at your home. The police found the bodies in the freezer. You were ranting about demon children and a Ouija board. Like a jolt, I started to have bits of broken memories come to the front, but only one stood out. "Doc, did they ever find the Black Shadow?" Story 20, I meet someone on Reddit and now they are hacking accounts to play games with me. About a month ago, I posted to a Gaming Pals subreddit to find someone to play with on the PS4. I have a couple gaming friends in my life, but schedules tend to not intersect as much when you're an adult going to work and college. Online friends seemed like a good option. I had your usual responses where people claimed they'd love to play with me if only they weren't on PC or Xbox. In essence, no one responded as having a PS4 and with the specific games I had listed. That is until a few days later, after I had assumed my post would be too buried for anyone to respond to it. The message was from /u/010010010. The only thing it said was, PS4? I figured he was writing a message and accidentally clicked send before it was completed. I wrote back with only, Bo 3? As a way to make a joke at his glib message, while also hoping he would answer and actually have Black Ops 3. Nearly as soon as I clicked send and went to another page on Reddit, the orange envelope appeared. Well, this guy did not break character as his only response was, okay. Typically, I would ignore a response like this thinking it was someone wasting time. But I was bored and would like a person to game with that wasn't a complete random. I sent him my PSN name as my response. I didn't receive an immediate response like before and had quickly forgotten our back and forth. About a week later I received a message on PSN from Xcodify53, slightly changed for privacy, that said, Bo 3. I stared at it for a minute before I remembered our previous correspondence. I responded back with, yup, now? While also adding him as a friend. After some minutes he accepted my friend request and responded back with yes. I booted up Black Ops 3 and invited him. While I waited for him to join, I took a look at his trophies. He played a variety of FPS games and some free-to-play games. I noticed he got all the trophies for BO3. No small feat in my humble opinion. After 20 minutes he finally joined. We jumped into a team deathmatch lobby, and when our match began we took off our separate ways. At least I assume we did. I noticed he didn't move right away, but I wasn't going to stand there and see if he ever did. I also noticed his name kept popping up as he was being killed quite a bit. We all get rusty. As I ran around the map, I saw him inside a building and he wasn't doing so well. His specialist was circling around in place as though he didn't know exactly how to control it. A few scenarios went through my head. His game glitched, his controller broke, his controller battery died. Obviously something wasn't working right. The match ended and his KD was 0-21. We played a few more matches and he got a bit better. Well, when I say better, I mean just that. It was better than 0-21. I would follow him around to see how he was playing, lots of running around corners with free abandoned and going into well-known camping areas without being prepared. He did achieve some kills with whatever SMG he was using. Also, as odd as it may sound, he looked like he was having fun. My suspicions proved correct when he sent me a message that only read, "Smile." But I was getting burnt out on running around in silence. I said in my Reddit post that I wanted to mic chat, but I wasn't exactly expecting this person to pay attention to details. Also, I was having a hard time believing that the person I was playing with was the same guy that got all those trophies. Had to be a younger brother situation. Eventually I wrote to him, "Good game." Gonna head to bed, and exited out of the game. Before I turned off my PS4 I got a response, "Okay." I was busy with school for a few days, but when I found myself alone and bored again I messaged his PSN and asked if he wanted to play some more. After some time I got a reply, "Hacked account and you were added when I was locked out. Do you know Hacker?" I wasn't surprised that someone else owned the PSN account, but I was a bit unnerved that the account was stolen. I responded saying that I wasn't sure who he was but shared his Reddit information. He thanked me and I didn't hear from him again. Why anyone would steal an account just to game online with a stranger was beyond my understanding. At least the mystery on why he was playing so poorly was solved. I sent /u/010011010 a message saying that I found out about the hacked account. I wasn't surprised that I didn't hear back from him. That is until a week later on PSN. This time the account's name was Static4, again, slightly changed. He sent me a friend request with a message in it that said, "I am 010011010." I accepted the request and decided to get to the bottom of this with a straightforward message, "Did you hack another account? Why don't you make your own account? I can't play with you if you are playing with accounts that aren't yours." His response, "Where are you? At home." I was bothered by his question but didn't want to let on and instead went the dry route. "I cannot find your home." This wasn't the typical trolling behavior one finds online, and though I felt a little uneasy, I reasoned to myself that this was some guy with decent hacking skills that is having fun at my expense. He must have a lot of free time on his hands and is willing to take his time with a person. I'm probably the only idiot that bothered to respond to his initial glib messages. "I've seen better trolling," I wrote back before unfriending and blocking him. I wondered if there was a way I could somehow warn the owner of the account that their PSN was hacked, but I couldn't think of one. Also, I didn't want to get any more involved and decided that contact with this person should be avoided. The next day I was gaming by myself when I received a notification from my real-life friend's PSN. My heart sank when the message on the corner of my TV screen read, "I am 010011010. Even though I knew deep down this wasn't my fault, a flash of guilt washed over me. I'll have to tell him his account was hacked and also explain my involvement. Immediately, I went to my phone and clicked on the call icon by his name, but when he answered, I ended up losing my nerve. Instead of going into the details, I asked him if he's playing anything right now. "Nah man, something weird happened earlier today," he replied. "I was messing around in the PSN store when I felt a shock through my controller. Not a minor one either." "Do you know how?" I asked. I don't know, it was plugged into the console charging. My finger must have grazed the port or something. Does a USB charging cord even have enough voltage? No clue, but I felt a flash of pain. After I was able to let go of the controller, I looked at my TV and noticed I was signed out. I tried to sign back in, but it said my password didn't match and kept kicking me out. I figure something got fried on my PS4. I'll deal with it tomorrow. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. Or maybe it was too convoluted a story to tell. I met someone online who is hacking PSN accounts to play with me. Also, the electrocution was a coincidence. Or was it connected? It didn't even make sense in my head. When I had made the phone call, I had instinctively put the TV on mute. Now that I looked at the screen, I realized I had more messages from my friend's stolen account. I checked them. Where are you? I am 010-01010. Reply? I struggled to decide on a course of action. I didn't want to egg him on, so I figured cooling off for a while was the thing to do. Maybe if this guy figures out I won't respond, he'll stop using my friend's account and move on to another one like before. I can try to do that at the very least. I turned off the TV and did the dishes. Afterwards, I engaged in some haphazard studying. My mind wandered while I looked around the room and noticed my TV shelf had a fine layer of dust on it with a dead fly near the console. I turned on the TV, preparing to throw some music on while I did some light cleaning. When I did, I noticed my PS4 was still on. On the home screen, the games were being scrolled through. I looked at my controller. The lack of a light bar indicated it was off. My stomach sank. Gazing at the actively scrolling menu, I shifted and turned around to look around my room. No one else was here, of course. Just me and my poltergeist PS4. Except it wasn't a poltergeist. It was a someone, and this someone was giving me the distinct feeling that I was not alone in my apartment. The scrolling eventually stopped. For a brief moment, I thought it might be a momentary fluke and I started to feel some relief. But then I noticed the console getting brighter. The bar of light near the disk drive was a much more vibrant blue than usual. Hypnotically staring at my console, I was unable to fully understand what was happening. The strip of light then started to lower in intensity. It was then that I noticed a faint blue spark by the console's USB port where a charging cord was plugged. Rather suddenly, the charging cord straightened out as though it was shocked with a jolt of electricity. The free end of it landed on the dead fly where another small spark appeared. The fly's legs began to twitch. Then slowly and haggardly, it began to buzz and move away from the cord and twitch across the TV shelf. Eventually, it rolled its way off the shelf and onto the carpeting, where it attempted to fly. As it popped about, I silently picked up one of my shoes and watched it. What the hell, I muttered to myself. I felt insane even thinking it, but after what I just witnessed I felt this wasn't just a fly. I lifted my arm with the shoe and looked at it for a moment longer. The sporadic flying attempts were coming in my general direction. It stopped moving for a moment and then with even greater effort than before, the attempts at staying in the air became more violent with directions harder to predict. When it nearly grazed my arm, I reflexively slammed the shoe on top of it. I let go and sat down on the carpeting. I didn't want to see the thing underneath the shoe, dead or alive. I gathered myself and slowly picked the shoe back up to see what was underneath. One of the fly's legs was still twitching, but after a moment it stopped. A spark of blue light came out of the dead fly's body and scattered across the carpeting. It happened so fast that I didn't have time to move when it passed me and barely missed touching my leg. It had faded away as fast as it appeared. The sensation that I wasn't alone was replaced with the sensation that I had destroyed a living being. 010-01010 was no longer.